I'm Paul Sullivan, your host on the Company of Dads podcast, where we explore the sweet, sublime, strange, and silly aspects of being a lead dad in a world where men often feel they have to hide or at least not talk about their parenting role. I know this from firsthand experience as the lead dad to my 3 girls, 3 dogs, 3 cats, and 3 fish. I did this all while managing my career and striving to be an above average husband. One thing I know for sure about being a lead dad is it's not a normal role. You're not doing what dads have traditionally done, going to work and leaving the parenting to mom or someone else. Nor are you always welcome into the world where moms are the primary caregivers. But here at the Company of Dads, our goal is to shake all that off and focus on what really matters: family, friendship, finance, and fun. Today, my guest is Mike Teager, who's one of the first lead dads to reach out when I said I was leaving the New York Times and starting something that became the Company of Dads. I'm super excited to have him here today. We've got a lot to talk about: his day job, his music career, his son, his wife, a teacher, and most of all, how he started watching classic wrestling. Like, we're talking Bob Backlund, Andre the Giant, Gorgeous George type stuff. How he started watching classic wrestling while doing dishes. Second to that, of course, is the trio he's got going in his house. Him on saxophone, his wife on viola, and their young son on cello. Mike, welcome to the Company of Dads podcast. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed that introduction. I'm sure we'll talk wrestling at some point. My wife is going to severely roll her eyes when she hears that. But
I got to ask first, like with the Teager trio you got going on there, is there any percussion, like a dog who plays the snare, or like a cat who like tings on the triangle?
We do have a drum set a full drum set in the basement that I purchased this summer just to have. Being a musician, being involved with rehearsals, if, like, for instance, one of the things I play in a cover band around town. And I figured, if I don't really play drums, my son bangs on the drums, he's 7. But I figured, if I needed to host a rehearsal, I could at least tell the drummer, hey, you don't have to bring something. We have something here. Plus, it would just be nice to have. But I don't know. Our son, he likes to bang on anything, and sometimes he'll bang on his cello while he's playing it. So there's always something. So our house is full of instruments.
It's just very thoughtful of you, because, whenever you see those drummers like setting up for a gig, it takes them forever. Like, they've got drum upon drum upon drum, and you with the saxophone, you just you walk in, right? You're being thoughtful.
Yeah, no, it's, I do have, I guess for a saxophone player, I would have a lot of gear, but I can still do it in one trip. So, my hands and my shoulders and my back will be full, but I generally can do it in one trip while holding a coffee. So it's not that much stuff.
That's really good. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
So let's focus on, Company of Dads, but we're about lead dads. How did you figure out, you and I've talked about this, you sent me some great stuff ahead of time, but how did you figure out who was going to be, the primary parent when your wife was pregnant? How did you figure out that you were going to be, the lead dad?
Well, we had, early on, we had decided we did not want to go the daycare route. And we had personal reasons for doing that, but also financial reasons. At the time, we lived in East Lansing, Michigan, which is home to Michigan State University. It's not the most expensive place in the country to live, but for Michigan, it was not a cheap area to live. And the daycare there was astronomically high. It would have been a second mortgage just to put our child in daycare, even for 2 days a week, because you buy the slot for the full time, regardless of how frequently or infrequently you use it. And so we had various.
But plus also, the other thing is he would start coming home, like his first words could be something like "Go Spartan," right? And that might not be.
Well, yeah, I should state right off the bat that I am completely sports illiterate. So I did get my master's at MSU, so I guess I'm a Spartan by default. But I know I drive through Canada, or used to before the pandemic. I would drive through the border with some frequency, and usually, 1 out of every 4 or 5 times, a border guard would, especially when I lived in East Lansing, ask me where I lived and say East Lansing, and there would be some sort of U of M reference or Spartan reference, and I would go along with it. But then, they might ask me about the team, and I'm like, I apologize. So we decided that one of us would be home. At the time, our son was born in 2015. So 2014, My wife is a full-time teacher, has been, this is her, I think, 11th year, 10th or 11th year of teaching. Um, and I taught part-time on the side. I performed regularly around the state and was recording, and I taught private lessons, but I also had a quote unquote day job working for a software company fully remotely. So I've been a remote employee in one regard or another for, over 12 or 13 years. So before it was the cool thing to do, I guess. And I've always been, I'm an only child. I like to have control. I was the person in the group project in high school who was always did all the work, and so I said, you know, my schedule is flexible enough that I could probably make this work if we don't want to do daycare. And we didn't, because we figured it could be a wash. We could do daycare, or, you know, my wife didn't want to quit her job or go on a 1 or 2 year leave of absence or anything. So I said, I think we could make this work. So on paper, the sketch was, I'll watch him all day until 4-ish, 4:35-ish. And then when you get home, Kristen, my wife, she would take care of him in the evenings until he went to bed, and then I would basically work second shift for the software company. Up and Running Software is the company I work for, and that was the plan. So I started to reduce over a series of months over the course of the pregnancy, reduce my obligations outside of that. Because I taught for a while and was performing and teaching regularly, but it was just supplemental income. I mean, it was nice supplemental income, but it wasn't necessary. And so I gradually reduced my responsibilities. So when my son was born in January, my wife had maternity leave for several months. Both of our moms were helping out in some degree. Her mom came from Buffalo, and my mom lived at the time when we lived in East Lansing, lived about 100 miles away, and they were helping out. But then when my wife went back to work 3 months later, so I guess at the end of April, I then transitioned my work schedule to be home with him during the day.
Yeah.
Well, I was home all the time because I work from home, but I would be with him during the day, and then I would try to basically work second shift when my wife got back.
Yeah, and I mean, like, every lead dad is balancing things, and you're juggling, making trade-offs, and it was great that you had an employer that could, allow you to do your work at a different time. But you are a musician, and you've had success as a musician, and it's like being a great chef. Great chefs work at night. They work on weekends. Musicians perform at night and on weekends. What was the thinking, from the beginning, as how you would still maintain your music career while becoming a parent?
That's a good question. It's funny when I always find the phrase odd, but when my wife and I were trying to get pregnant, I guess, because, and part of us, I should say, we came from some level of privilege in that, they say, you can't be fully prepared for a baby, and we just have the one son. On paper, he was a planned pregnancy, and so on and so forth. So on paper, we were ready. I mean, emotionally, I was completely unprepared.
No. So this is, I remember I've got 3 daughters, and the oldest is 12 and a half, and then 9 and a half, then 4 and a half. And when that first one, we went to the sort of new parent seminar at the local hospital where my wife would give birth. And we sat around. It was, 6 o'clock at night. We had coffee. They had like a donut, which I can't believe they have donuts at a hospital, but I ate them because who doesn't love donuts? And they kind of give you a little doll, teach you how to, diaper the baby. And you kind of leave there with a false sense of confidence, like a real false sense of confidence. And once I was like 3 months into being a dad, I was like, this is such a bad idea. You should have like the parenting class taught by Navy SEALs. They should kick the door into your room at 3 a.m, throw water on you, start yelling at you after you've already been out and had, 4 glasses of wine, and then you try to diaper the baby. So that's the whole thing. It sounds like thinking you're prepared versus being prepared are two different things.
Yeah, but it was funny when we were trying to get pregnant. I've never been a kid person per se. I mean, I wanted us to have a family and a child, if not children. So while we were trying, my wife was very excited about the future possibilities of, what our family would become. And I was kind of not hesitant, because obviously I I thought this was something I want to do, but I was also like, oh my God, what am I,
Yeah.
what's going to happen? I'm completely unprepared for this, emotionally, and, um, mentally and so on and so forth. But as soon as my wife found out she was pregnant, our roles almost reversed, where then she was, cause she has, I just exist for the pregnancy. She has to actually go through it,
Right.
and,
Yeah.
as I don't have many pregnancies to compare it to, but I mean, it's a physical ordeal, to carry around a child. But then I went into complete excitement mode because it became real, and I almost went into sort of reptilian brain, um, where most things in my life stopped mattering that I thought were very important,
Right.
and so it was like, yeah, I want to, maybe maintain my musicianship and maintain my relationships, and there are certain gigs I didn't want to lose. I playing at this place a few times a year, and so on and so forth. But not that I completely forgot about it, but it just sort of went away.
Mm.
Well, I'll figure that out later. I'll deal with that when it comes. I need to be prepared for the little guy when he
And what
arrives.
what was the thing? The thing was that even though you have an advanced degree in music, you're a professional musician. The idea was that your software job was going to help the family financially, and the music would just have to be on the back burner for a year or two, and then you could always pick
Yeah.
it up later. Or
Yeah, and also, when I first got out of, school, after my master's, and I was thinking, oh, I'll probably go back for a doctorate and go into academia. And I quickly not quickly, but gradually over several years, kind of grew disillusioned with that because I know a lot of people in academia, and I know a lot of people who are doing well. I know a lot of people who have doctorates, work at the Apple store. And
right,
so, and I know quite a fair amount who, they're just permanent adjuncts and part-time professors, and they're completely burnt out. And, I had a stable job that I, um, enjoyed. The work is fine. The people I work with, at Operating Software are great, and it's drama free because it's remote. So like, there's no real chit chat. We have a meeting,
right.
but like I don't know their families. They don't know my families. Like we just know the work. Like we've known each other for years, but there's not the social aspect to it, and it makes it very efficient. And
I was hoping you were going to say that you were cutting edge early on in the sort of Zoom holiday party that this
oh
firm.
no, I no, I actually, it's funny. With everything, yeah, I think during the pandemic, I had maybe 5 Zoom conversations with people. I just talked to them on the phone or whatever. But I know that was a craze for a while. But no, I figured the one and outside of the work and or the stability that job brings to me, it's also, I have a great boss. I report directly to the CEO, and there's not the pressure. If I want to work more than full time, like if I want to put in extra hours, I'm welcome to do that. But he also knows that his employees, myself included, have a life outside of work. And so I was able to structure it so
Yeah.
where, I can pursue the playing opportunities and the creative endeavors that I am interested in, even if they don't really bring in money, so to speak, as opposed to being reliant on what musicians would call the wallpaper gigs of playing, for 3 hours at the steakhouse for $50 because they technically want a band, but what they really want is a CD with people standing by the wall because, it can't be too loud. It needs to be ignorable music. And so, I've played hundreds of those before, and I didn't want to do that anymore. And so the job afforded me the security, but also the flexibility and the freedom, especially pre-child, to pursue those things. But
Yeah.
when my son arrived, it was like, look, I have signed up, I have agreed, and I want to be taking care of him during the day. I also still want to be employed. I want. There's only so many things
I know,
I
but you
can.
skipped over. You kind of said that and you skipped over
Right.
it, and maybe because you're just used to it. But I think it's so important that you said that the CEO of this company, your boss,
Yeah.
knows that his employees have a life outside of work. I mean, one of the
Yes.
biggest adjustments for people who were fortunate enough to be able to work from home. Of course, millions and millions of people were not fortunate enough to work from home. Those who were fortunate enough suddenly realized that there was no longer a disconnect between work
Right.
and family, or their employers did not take into account that there would be this disconnect between work and family. That if we think back a couple of years, there was, I don't know if you remember, there was this guy who was talking on the BBC. It went viral, and his son crawled into the room.
Oh, yes,
when he was
yes.
and then his poor wife is like pulling the kid out, and like that happens all the time now. And like that overlap is just. I mean, you're really sort of on the cutting edge of that in a sense. And was that always just implicit with the firm, with your boss, that there was going to be this balance, or was it more just, hey, look, Mike, you got a life. As long as you do at a high level the things we'd like you to do, we're cool with all the other stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I have, part of, it's funny. And even now, a while back, I was here in Buffalo. I was playing part-time. I considered it sort of like community volunteer work. I played with this group called the Grandfathers Orchestra. I'm the youngest in the band by like 30 years. And it's a big band and playing all the old tunes. And one guy asked me, because we would rehearse on Tuesday mornings. My son's in school now. He was like, "Are you a first responder or something? Like, why are you here?" Like, because I just show up in my, sweatpants with my horn, and I play, and I had to. It was the first time anyone's ever asked me that. If you saw my arms, you would not think I was engaged in any sort of labor, physical labor. But and I had to laugh. I said, "Oh, I work remotely, and but part of it is I am very strict with my schedule, and part of it is in my job." It's pretty solitary work most of the time. I mean, I have a lot of client contacts, and I have a lot of contacts within the organization, but a lot of what I do is sort of internal, and even the external stuff, as long as the work gets done, and I'm able to, when appropriate, make a call or be a part of a meeting. But even that's kind of rare in my particular role. As long as the work is done, then if I need to, for instance, it's Tuesday, I take my son to cello on Tuesdays. I don't have to inform anybody that I'm gone, so to speak. And I've always been very rigid with my time. So, I learned early on, when we bought our first house in Michigan, it had to have a home office, or it had to have an extra bedroom. That would be the dedicated office. And I'm pretty Pavlovian. I only work on my I have a personal laptop and a work laptop. I only work on my work laptop. I only do it at my desk. Occasionally I can migrate to the couch, late in the evening if it's.
I always fall asleep when I do that. I always wake up at like 2 a.m. and my neck hurts.
But I need to be in my one little spot in the house where I work, and that's when I get it done. But, I'm not emailing clients at 3 a.m. or anything like that. If they need something during the day, I can schedule it like either when my son's at school or if he's at home, he's taking a nap. But there's always been that, and it's not like my boss is lax to the point of, hey, do what you want and we'll just pay you money. I mean, obviously I have responsibilities and I get those done, but I try and make anything that involves me associating with other people, like via phone or a meeting, I'll make those work during business hours. And then if I'm just working, then I can do that in the evening or late at night, and I don't have to bother anybody with that.
Yeah, you made a good point there, because I'm also an only child, but that's not the good point you made. That's just coincidence. But I am super scheduled. And when I was at the New York Times for so long, I was able to work all this other stuff around this it was the opposite, without informing them, without telling them that I was a lead dad. It's like I had a weekly deadline for a column. I knew when, bigger projects were due. I knew, when a book was going to be due. And so therefore I had this crazy, and I still do, color-coded calendar that allowed me to know, okay, this is for me, this is for my kids, this is for my wife, this is random homeowner shit, whatever it was. And like that schedule, sometimes it can be oppressive, but other times it can be liberating. You're like, okay, I have this block of time to do the following. But one of the things, you had mentioned when you and I were corresponding back and forth was, sort of the move from, Michigan to upstate New York. But the other thing is, that could, I don't know if it was foreseen or not, but that was at least a choice. The other part was that, you became a first-time dad, and a couple years later, COVID hits, and you're just about to get your son finally into school, have a schedule, block out in whatever color he is on your calendar. He's there for those hours, work around it. and then COVID hit. So when you think of all the things that you've been doing up to that point, because I think as humans, we do really well when we're focused on something. We're focused on a goal. You've done everything right. And then, of course, COVID comes. Your son comes home. Your wife is a teacher. She has to start dealing with remote, learning. How did that, kind of scramble what you had in mind as a sort of, lead dad, but also professional and a musician?
Well, it was, I mean, I could, I know we like to, I know this is more of a positive discussion generally, but I sort of likened it to when I found out that my son would be fully remote for the fall of 2020, I guess. So that would have been the first fall.
No, 20. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so like he was in preschool when it started. So he went from being in school for 2.5 hours to he was just home all the time. And that was a reversion, and it was frustrating, but we made that work because I'd been used to it for years of him always being home. And well, I should couch this with I'm pretty introverted. I'm not necessarily shy. I'm an introverted person, and I worked from home anyway. So my wife and I would always joke, and this isn't to belittle anyone who's suffering during this, but I was one of the victors, I guess, of the pandemic, in that I was used to being home all the time anyway, and it was like welcome to my world, I guess. And so oddly enough, my daily routine didn't change that much when the pandemic hit. But in my mind for years, I'd been thinking, fall 2020, he's going to school full time, and I'm going to be me again, I guess.
But it's also like those cartoons with like a prisoner's calendar, where you're marking off the X's.
It's funny you mention that because I always likened it to, because that was when they announced he was going to be full, and I completely understood it. It wasn't like I'm going to send him regardless. It was understandable why he was remote, and the school district in which we live handled it great. I mean, he was in school, he was on the computer, but however it could have been done, I don't think they could have done it better. So I was pleased. I was a pleased parent. But I told my wife, I said, I feel like I was up for parole and I got denied. And I don't think she found that as funny the first time, first 5 or 6 times I mentioned that. Because she was home. She's a teacher. She teaches in a different county. But she was home in the spring, but then her school was also remote, but she was teaching from the classroom. So in the fall, she was still going back to work. But then it was he and I were at home all day. And even when he was, older, 3 or 4, I would try to not work around him if he was awake. I mean, it's different now. He's 7. He knows that if he's home, like with a cold or something, like daddy has to work, I'll still play with him.
Yeah, no, it's miserable. It's miserable if you have a young child and you're trying to be engaged with that child and then respond to work emails.
Well, that was the thing. It's like, I don't want him to associate us being together as me just staring at the computer and, him trying to get my attention. So like if he's home, we'll do Legos, we'll do yard. He loves to do chores. That sounds weird, but he likes to work in the yard. So we'll go out and we'll work in the yard, so on and so forth. And, for Zoom school, I was sitting right next to him, helping him with his assignments where applicable, watching him frustrated, trying to do them by himself, where he needed to. But when we got the news that he was not going back, I mean, I was utterly devastated. And that took a while. It wasn't until he actually went to school full time. I think he started 2 days a week in January 2021.
Yeah.
And then it went to 4 days a week, March, maybe. It's a little fuzzy. But even that, when he went back those 2 days a week, that first day he went, I was like, and normally he would leave and I would just work the whole time, focus. I got to get as much done while he's out. And I, like, for the first hour of just being at the house, I felt like William Wallace at the end of Braveheart, where he's just screaming freedom, And I was
gonna say Tom Cruise in Risky Business, and you're sliding around the house in your socks.
Yeah, no, it was such unmitigated joy the first day he was gone. And and it can sound to the uninitiated like, wow, that's a horrible thing to think about your kid. It's like, I've been with him every day for 5 years at this point, and he loves school. He wants to be in school, but like I needed some sort of semblance of identity,
Yeah.
back in normalcy. And it's nice to work during the day. It's nice to not be working till 2 a.m. You know, every
Yeah,
night. Yeah.
of course. When you talk about identity and some semblance of normalcy, I've always thought like the loneliest man in the world is the dad on a playground with his child filled with moms and caregivers. Like you could just stand there, by yourself. How did you make the adjustment moving from, East Lansing when you gone to Michigan State? So you had a community there of musicians, friends, all those random acquaintances that sort of make up the fabric of our lives, the people we see when we're getting a cup of coffee, whatever, and just say hi to, moving to, Western New York, Buffalo area of New York, and not having that, and then having COVID, and then, being there with your son and your wife is working. How did you balance that, or how did you create a community when, there wasn't necessarily one that was probably super welcoming to a lead dad?
No, it was. I mean, it wasn't not necessarily just a lead dad, but musicians generally are. So, for instance, the one drawback about working from home, if you could call it that, is that given the situation, we moved to a new city in a new state, and my wife is from the area. It's part of the reason we moved here was so
Yeah.
we could have more direct help from the grandparents. And my mom lived in Michigan, but she was still working at the time. She wasn't retired, and she traveled a lot for work, so she could come on the weekends. But if we needed, and this is not to fault her because she had to work, but it's not like, oh, I need help on a Wednesday. What are we going to do? If my wife is working, we'd have to try and find a babysitter or something. And so, and just for family reasons, we thought this would help, and a position opened up, and so my wife applied and got it. And so it was planned. It was a family decision, us moving, but it's not like I went to a new job in the new city. I just stayed in the house all the time, and I even told my neighbors, like when I first moved in, I said, I do work. I was like, if you see me around the property in my pajamas all the time, it's because I work from home. Like it was almost like trying to justify, because to them, they just see me with my son all day. Like
Right. I know.
basically, and they're probably thinking, what's this guy doing all day?
Right. Right.
And then his wife gets home, and then she's playing with the boy, and then he like disappears. He like never leaves the house.
Oh, yeah.
What's this guy doing? And so that was the one drawback, it was difficult to meet other people. And musically, musicians, it's a very, even for like local gigs that mean nothing, it's very cutthroat. Because I try to make contacts at like the symphony orchestra or pit orchestras, to say like, hey, if you need a sub, I'd be more than happy to fill, if someone's sick. But they take it as, oh, you're trying to steal my
job,
my
Yeah.
precious gigs that I have. And it's
Yeah.
like, but it's like, I'm not, and I don't have I might have the stomach for, I don't have the patience for the politicking that goes with some of that. So I just said, you know what, if you're that passionate about, playing at the steakhouse, then that's your problem. So, and the only thing I can think to liken it to, and it's probably a weak analogy, is like being a military spouse, where you just like move to a new location and you don't know anybody. Because the only people I knew for the longest time when we lived here were my in-laws and people who knew my in-laws.
Right.
I've met some other people since then. But as you were saying, I started playing in this band in 2019, but then like 4 months later, the pandemic hit. And so that our gigs went away for the most part. We could do outdoor stuff in the warm months, but that was about it. It was frustrating. But even by the time the pandemic hit, I was doing more than I had been in the previous several years. So there was some nourishment there, I guess. And I've always been very active, and I won't go into, specifics or, partisan engagement, but I've always thought that civic involvement is very important. So I was on a city commission in East Lansing. I had to resign it because we moved. But then I started getting very active in municipal activities around here. So currently I serve on the ethics board for the town. It was an appointed position, but we meet once a month, and I do some work with the subcommittee of the school board. I find that not necessarily that the people I serve with were all best friends. We all get
Yeah.
along. But I find the activity of going out and doing that productive. It means something. I get as much out of that than I would, as I would, going to the bar with a bunch of friends or something.
Sure,
Because I
sure.
still keep in touch with most of my best friends live in Michigan, and one lives out your way in New Jersey, and like we keep in touch on the phone. It's no different than when I lived in a different state. I don't get to see them with the frequency that I would like, but just being able to say that I'm doing something other than taking care of my son and working is that it's very fulfilling. But the playground thing is funny. It's odd. I generally, my natural expression is a scowl. I guess I don't have the most welcoming of natural facial expressions. And my wife is always trying to correct that. Or to remind me to keep it under control if we're going to a party or so. She's like,
Yeah.
try and look like you're having a good time. I was like, I am. This is the face you married, I guess. But, yeah, it's weird. Cause and I'm not to say I'm a victim, because I'm not sad about it, but it's an odd dynamic to be the one guy at the pickup line or the one guy at the PTA meeting. Yeah, I liken it to, I feel like there's a club that I'm not a part of when I'm there. Not that anyone is disrespectful or rude or anything, but the last PTA meeting I walked into, and like everyone got quiet, and because I felt like they were part of a group and I was just this guy that showed up. But it was compounded by the fact that I was the only guy to have been coming to all the PTA meetings for the last 18 months. And I thought, you should at least know my face by now. I don't talk on the Zoom, but you should recognize me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so many things you said were interesting. And one about, when you moved to the new house, you had to sort of make it a point to say, oh yeah, and by the way, I work, and for, 13 years that I was writing for the Times, 12 of which I was a dad. And it was always like, oh, well, yeah, but he's a New York Times columnist. But I'd be at the pediatrician, or I'd be at, the ballet, or I'd be at, the play date at, 3:15 on a Tuesday. But it's that sort of feeling that, you have to say, yeah, but, and is one of the things I really am trying to do is make it more of a normal thing. It's not like we can have this community. It's just, you're just a parent. You happen to be the lead dad. You happen to be, doing the primary role, but you're just a parent. And, the thing about the school, I mean, it's, this is the third time one of my daughters has asked me to be the class parent. And the first time I said, this would be great. I'll do it willingly. The second time I had to do it because I'd already done it for one daughter. So you can't, she said, hey, by the way, he did it for my older sister. You have to do it. Okay, fine. And then a couple of years had gone by and I thought, oh, I'm done with this. And then my daughter asked me again, because she went to middle school, new school, Dad, would you do it? And my initial reaction was, oh, good God, no. I don't. But then I was like, no, well, I'm not going to be that guy. I got to pitch in. And so same thing though, on these Zooms, we'll be on the Zooms and they'll start them up and they're like, welcome class moms. How are you all doing today? And I'll be like, and dad, in class, and okay, class moms, I got a robust agenda today. I was like, is this thing on? Why the fuck can you not hear me? Like, and dad.
Well, actually, it's funny because my friend Alice made the observation when we were talking the other day that she said, I don't know if you realize it, but whenever you reference the parents, you say the other moms, as if you are one of the moms. And I didn't realize it until she said it, but I noticed that I always say that, like the other moms, as if because that's how I feel. Speaking of, I don't know if you've ever had this, but I have a New York Times subscription along with the Buffalo News, and I'll be scrolling at night, and I tend to not really read like the lifestyle section or anything, but on like the front page, they'll pop out like 5 stories, like the most trafficked of the day. And I always find myself drawn to the stories written from the, female perspective of, how it's so rough being a mom in X situation and Y situation. And I find myself reading and agreeing and relating to maybe like the first 7 paragraphs. And then there's always like, not always, but there's often this turn of where then it becomes very it becomes like very gendered and coded, the language. And I'm like, oh, now I feel like I'm waiting at the pickup line. Like it's like I get the frustrations. I mean, I don't know what it's like to be, I only know my experience. I'm a cisgendered hetero male. So, and I'm the dad. So I only know my experience. So I don't know what it's like to be the mom per se, but, it's wild because I find myself drawn to those things and I relate to them more than I would relate to being, the traditional working parent who's gone most of the time.
Yeah.
But then I feel like there's always like this little jag at the end of, here's a club you're not in. I'm like, okay, so I'll just enjoy the first 2/3 of this story.
This is the first 2, and then just please wait quietly in the pickup line. That'd be great.
Yeah.
No, I see it exactly. There are times when I'll read those same stories and I'll you identify more with it's the primary parent, but it's also there's a part of me that thinks, not every guy can be the lead dad to be the primary parent, but I think every guy, particularly post COVID, post this pandemic, wherever we are in this pandemic, you can realize like, boy, if I did just a little bit more, it's kind of like that book, 10% better. If you could just be, if you could be 10% better of a dad, 10% better of a husband, 10% better of a, helping, like legit helping around the house. Like, it's almost like I want to create a lead dad boot camp. Like, okay, you're not going to be all the way in because you have other obligations, but guess what? You can fold the laundry while you're watching SportsCenter. I mean, you'll still know who won the game. You're not going to miss out.
Yeah, or watching wrestling, which is what I do.
Which is the segue I was looking for. Not just wrestling, but classic wrestling. Oh, yeah. So how does this come about?
I don't know I think I'm 10 years younger than you. So
how old are you?
I'll be 39 this summer.
So I just turned 49 today. We're talking on my birthday. So you're
happy birthday.
10 years younger.
Happy birthday.
But so I at least grew up. I remember grew up in outside of Springfield, Massachusetts, going to the Springfield Civic Center when Andre the Giant would be there, Jimmy Superfly Snuka, Bob Backlund. I remember going with my dad to see this stuff. And, back when we thought that wrestling was real, and I was like, I can't believe this. And so how did you, 10 years, younger than me, get interested in the stuff that I loved?
Well, so, and I'll couch this with this. I'll sort of bridge 2 points only to say, because my mom took me to live wrestling events when I was little, I'm the product of a single parent household. So I was raised by just my mom. And I only mention that because I guess I approach parenting not really thinking of roles as being mom or dad, but rather just parent. Like, I don't necessarily, I've never really,
I can't wait for you to bring this back to Andre the Giant, but keep going. Andre the Giant and Jimmy Superfly Snuka standing on his shoulders to jump off. Okay. I can't wait to bring this back.
No, but I was going to say, because my mom would take me to all of these wrestling events when I was little, but she took me because it was just, that was the parent I had, but relating to parenting, I've always thought of myself as the parent, not necessarily the capital D dad, or my wife being the capital M mom. Because I always look back at my mom and just saying, well, she did both roles. She fulfilled both of those. And so fast forwarding to, she was working and raising me, but she would also take me. I was really into watching wrestling when I'm a child of the 80s. So we're talking mid to late 80s. I was watching it on, and I'm watching the tail end of the era you're talking about, so Andre was still around. He turned heel, but Superfly Snuka was in and out of the WWF at this time. But, I know my first house show I saw was a lead up to WrestleMania 8, and the main event was a tag team of, Ric Flair and Sid Justice or Sid Vicious versus Macho Man and Hulk Hogan. And so that was the main event.
That's a main event. That's a legit main event.
And so, and I saw wrestling a few times, and I was super into WWF, like hardcore, from, I don't know, I was probably 4 or 5 until roughly 97. And the last time I saw a live wrestling event was when Stone Cold Steve Austin first became big. And I just sort of started to lose interest and, go on to, you realize it's not real after a while. And then you're like, yeah. And you're like, what am I watching? And my interest waned, and I really kind of didn't think about it at all until COVID July of 2020. And for whatever reason, I was practicing in the basement and I thought, I don't watch a lot of new series on streaming or whatever, but I was thinking, I wonder if they have any of those old wrestling matches on YouTube. So I don't even know why it popped in my mind. And I went down this rabbit hole, and like a week later, I subscribed to the WWE. I was like, oh, the WWE has a network. I'm going to check this out. And it was like, it has all the old matches. And much to my surprise and almost my disappointment, because I kind of thought, as with some things, I'll watch a few matches. I'll get this out of my system. I'll like relive the glory days for about a week. And then I'll move on to something else, like I'll move on to whatever my peripheral fascination is at the time. And it wasn't like I just sit around and watch these. Like I put it on mute, and when I'm warming up and playing scales or something, I'm just like watching a match, or I'm doing dishes and I got a YouTube feed.
But when listeners hear your music, your saxophone playing, it does not at all remind me of WWF before being WWE. Like, how does it help you warm up? This is what.
Well, I just, I just find it supremely entertaining. And I like to hear. Sometimes I'll wear headphones so I can hear him call the match, but because I find the yelling funny. But my wife, she'll see me, she'll witness me watching this because
she's mortified, right? And she's
like.
She has to be mortified. She has to be like roll her eyes at you.
Well, she'll say, of all your interests, this is the one like I can't pin down. Like I don't know where. I don't know.
Pin down. I like that.
Yeah. Well, exactly. Because I like various things. Like I like opera. I also like jazz, but I also like professional wrestling. And so, and she just says, this is so like ridiculous adolescent male. She's like, I'm surprised you're so entertained by this. And I can't, but anyway, I say this, it's been 18 months. I can't break the addiction. It's become like a regular part of my routine. But I guess a former colleague of yours, New York Times columnist, Jamel Bowie, tweeted recently, because he was on parental leave, that he was watching a bunch of garbage movies. And he says, I do a lot of dishes these days, and trash helps keep the tedium at bay. Watching trash helps keep the tedium at bay. And that's how it works for me. Like, I'm not invested in the story necessarily. I mean, and a lot of this is stuff I watched when I was little. And now, I don't know if with Peacock, it's under Peacock, their archives go back to the old territories in the 70s. So you can watch these old matches from like public access in Houston in 1978. Yeah. And, I'm slopping all that up. But it really reached its zenith yesterday, when I happened to see that Monday Night Raw is going to be in Buffalo in April, and I bought a ticket. Are you
going to take your son though? Are you going to take him to see it? Or do you
no. I wouldn't take. He would probably be into it. I don't know if my wife would be wild about me taking him. Plus, it's very late. But he's not actually seen wrestling. He's heard me talk about it. And so he knows that there's this thing where like people wrestle around. And he likes to wrestle anyway, or roughhouse, and so we'll wrestle. But, especially I started a chronological rewatch. So I started at WrestleMania 1, and then I've been watching, bits and pieces in the background. I'm up to like October 98 right now in the rewatch. And right now, I don't know if I would want 7-year-old watching some of the skits that are on the TV, but but it's just this funny little thing that's popped up where I didn't think about it for decades, and then now it's my go-to balm in the evening. If I'm washing the dishes, I put on the iPad, I put it on the windowsill because there's a window right in front of the sink, and then I just put a match on and I unload the dishwasher and I fold laundry. So, and my wife is like, all I hear is bells ringing and people screaming from the kitchen every night. But I'm like, I find it just enough interesting to pay 80% attention while it's on. Yeah. But I'm not completely wrapped up and emotionally invested in it when it's not on. But I find it supremely entertaining. So, I probably, with the frequency that I've talked about it over the last year and a half of my life, people probably get the impression that I just mainline this all the time, but it's just a fun little distraction. Like I said, like this is the first live wrestling event I've been to in decades that I'm going to in April. But I'm looking forward to it. It'll be fun.
This has been awesome, and you've proved my point that not just humans, but lead dads are infinitely interesting and complex people. So, Mike Teager, jazz musician, early adopter of remote work, wrestling fanatic, and lead dad. Thanks for joining me on the Company.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for you doing this. So I know my friend Alice put me in touch with you originally when your final article ran, and I thought it was a great thing. I thought it was a great thing to see in more mainstream avenues. So I look forward to seeing what happens here.
I really appreciate it. Thanks for being early in the community. It means a lot. So
thank you.